Picture a loaf of bread. Not the supermarket kind in plastic wrap with a best before Thursday sticker. Forget that bread entirely. That bread is so recent, so miraculously consistent that your great-great-grandparents would have stared at it like witchcraft. I mean real bread. Medieval bread. Start with grain that drowned in the fields because it rained all summer. Grind it on a wheel run by a man who's been stealing your flour for 3 years and you can't prove it. Mix it with water from a well that also drains half the street. Add yeast kept alive in a clay pot older than you are. A living creature you feed twice a day, every day. Because if it dies, your bread dies. And if your bread dies, the town starves. Now do all of that on your knees, on a stone floor, at 2 a.m. But here's the thing about being the town baker in 1315. You're not just making bread. You're operating under a royal law, the assize of bread, that tells you exactly how much your loaf must weigh, down to the fraction of an ounce based on grain prices set at market that week. Too light? They tie you to a wooden frame and drag you through the streets with the offending loaf hung around your neck. Too heavy? You go broke. You can't buy next week's grain. The town goes hungry anyway, just slower. The margin between those two disasters is the width of a thumb, and you hit it. Every loaf, every morning, alone. I'm Henry. These are history stories for sleep, or for people who apparently need to hear about impossible economics before they can relax, which, honestly, I respect. Tonight we're going back 800 years to a market town in England during the worst famine in living memory, and we're following one woman who kept her entire town fed through sheer stubbornness. One day, one baker, everything she touched, smelled, feared, and survived. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open. Not to darkness, exactly. To a kind of deep grey that is the absence of any light at all, except for the faint orange pulse from the banked fire across the room, barely alive, barely aglow. For a fraction of a second, half a breath, no more, you have no idea where you are. Then your body tells you. The stone floor beneath you, hard even through the straw pallet. The weight of the sheepskin blanket that smells of smoke and lanolin, and the specific combination of sweat and flour that has no name but is entirely yours. The deep ache in your lower back that has been there since you were 15 and lifted a full flour sack wrong and has never fully gone away. The cold. God, the cold. It's October in the year 1315, and the cold in the English Midlands in October is the kind that comes up through stone floors and settles in your joints while you sleep. Not the dramatic cold of a blizzard, nothing so theatrical. Just the quiet, insistent cold of a world that hasn't been warm since June and won't be warm again until May, and doesn't particularly care what that means for you. Then the smell hits. It's always the smell that tells you where you are. That's the thing about scent. It travels faster than thought, bypasses the reasoning parts of your brain entirely, speaks directly to whatever ancient part of you that knows things before you've decided to know them. The smell of wood ash. Not fresh ash. Old ash. The dry mineral smell of a fire that has been burning in this room every single day for longer than you've been alive. It's in the walls, in the beams, in the stone itself. Beneath that, the yeast. Alive and working even now, in the clay pot on the shelf near the hearth. The sour, almost alcoholic smell of something ancient doing its patient work in the dark. Your starter, the living culture of wild yeast that your mother kept before you, and her mother before her, fed twice a day, kept warm, never starved, never killed. That pot is older than you are. The yeast in it has been rising and falling and rising again for perhaps 40 years. If you die, someone needs to keep feeding it. You haven't told anyone that yet. Rye flour still hanging in the air from last night. The particular dustiness of it. Drier than wheat flour with a slight bitterness at the back of the throat if you breathe it deeply. You've been breathing it your whole life. Some days you think it's become part of your lungs. The sour, faintly rotten smell of the drain in the corner, because nothing about medieval sanitation is subtle or polite, including the drain in the corner. And underneath all of it, underneath the ash and the yeast and the rye and the drain, a smell that is harder to name because it's simply the smell of your own life, your own skin, your own exhaustion. Welcome to the town of Arden, in the county of Warwickshire, in the year of our Lord 1315, the worst year most of England has ever lived through, and you've only just begun. You don't lie there and contemplate the darkness. There is no time for contemplating darkness. There is never time for that. You're 23 years old and you've been waking before dawn every single day of your adult life. And your body has learned the schedule so completely that even when you want to sleep longer, even when your back aches and your hands ache and your head is thick with last night's worry, some deep alarm in your chest pulls you out before the church bell even rings. Up. The stone floor is a physical shock through your bare feet. Same as always. You do not own shoes appropriate for indoor use. Nobody does. Your outdoor pattens, the wooden overshoes that lift you above the mud, are by the door. Your feet go straight onto stone, and the stone is cold, and the cold travels up through your heels and ankles and into your legs, and you stand there for a moment, breathing, letting your body remember that this is normal. This is just the morning. You cross to the hearth in the dark. You know this room the way you know your own hands. Better, maybe, because your hands sometimes surprise you, but this room never does. 12 paces from the pallet to the hearth. The slight dip in the third stone from the door. The low beam you've hit your head on perhaps 200 times and still occasionally forget. The shelf where the yeast pot lives, warm from the dying fire, its clay sides barely above cold. You check the starter first, before anything else, before water, before kindling, before thought. You lift the wooden lid and lean close in the near darkness, and the smell rises up strong and sweet, sour and familiar, and you can feel, actually feel, with the tips of your fingers just above the surface, the slight heat coming off it, the living warmth of fermentation. It's alive. Good. Every morning you check, and every morning so far it has been alive, and every morning you feel the same small, private relief. Not dramatic, just good. Still here, still going, the fire next. The banked coals are still red at the centre, buried under ash, preserved through the night. You pull the ash back carefully with the iron poker, the one your father made or had made a lifetime ago, with the little curl at the end that was meant to be decorative but mostly just catches on things, and coax the coals back to life. Blow on them gently, then with more force until your cheeks ache. Feed them kindling. Small sticks first, then larger pieces, then a real log when the flames take hold. The light changes. The room goes from grey to orange. Shadows appear on the walls, jumping with the fire's movement. Your shadow, large and unsteady, crosses the room ahead of you. Now, water. The bucket by the door is half full from yesterday evening, which means it's covered in a thin skin of ice at the top. You break through it with your fist. The impact stings, spreads cold up your wrist, and use the iron ladle to fill the small pot for boiling. While the water heats, you dress. A linen shift well worn, thin enough to see through in sunlight but warm enough against your skin. Over that a woolen kirtle, the main garment, a long dress of undyed brown wool that reaches your ankles. It's not beautiful. Nothing you own is beautiful. But the wool is thick and good, and your mother made it from fleece that came from the flock on the East Hill, and you know every inch of it, every repair, every place where it's been darned and strengthened against wear. Your coif, a linen cap that covers your hair completely, essential. Flour gets into everything in a bakehouse. Everything. If you don't cover your hair, you find flour in it 3 days after you last baked. The coif ties under your chin and feels tight in the way that means the day has officially started. A heavy linen apron over the kirtle. This one is so thoroughly impregnated with flour and lard and ash that it's almost stiff. It doesn't really get clean anymore. It gets washed, and it dries, and it still smells of every bread ever baked in it. 1,000 loaves, the memory of them, pressed into the fibres. Your hands. You look at them in the firelight, the way you always look at them in the morning, checking. The skin on your knuckles is cracked again. The pad of your right thumb, where the dough scraper catches, has a new callus forming over an old one, layer on layer, so the skin there is almost reptilian in its thickness. 3 of your fingernails are black where something came down on them. You don't even remember what. There's always something coming down on a finger in a bakehouse. The joints of your fingers are slightly swollen from the cold. Capable hands, ugly hands, the hands of someone who works. You rub them together, breathe on them, flex them until the stiffness eases and start the bread. The oven is the centre of everything, not the fireplace, not the hearth. The oven. It occupies an entire wall of the room next to the main bakehouse, a massive dome of fired clay and stone built by your grandfather when he first established this bakery 30-odd years ago, designed to hold heat for hours, to release it evenly, to transform raw dough into bread with a consistency and reliability that seems, if you haven't grown up watching it happen, almost miraculous. It takes 4 hours to heat properly. 4 hours of feeding the fire inside the dome, bundles of faggots, bundled sticks, thrust through the mouth of the oven and lit, burning fast and hot, filling the inside with flame. You push in bundle after bundle, watching the dome interior go from black to grey to a kind of glowing cream colour that means the stone has absorbed all the heat it can hold. You do this every morning. Some mornings, many mornings, if you're honest. You do this so automatically that you can barely remember doing it afterward. Your hands load the faggots, your eyes check the colour of the dome, your body feeds the fire, while your mind is somewhere else entirely. Making the list of the day, calculating the grain, worrying about the grain, worrying about the guild warden, worrying about whether the Picard family's account will ever be settled before Christmas, worrying about the roof. The roof! That is its own category of worry and has been since last spring. The faggots go in, the fire climbs, the dome grows hot. While you wait, while the oven does its slow, exacting work, you begin the dough. This is the part that nobody who doesn't bake understands. They think bread is simple. Grain plus water plus heat. 3 things. How complicated could it be? Very complicated. Infinitely complicated. Complicated in the way that only living things can be. Because bread is alive and living things do not do what you tell them to do with any consistency or predictability. The grain is the first variable. Your grain this year is a mix of rye and maslin, a blend of rye and wheat. Because pure wheat flour is expensive even in a good year, and this is not a good year. The harvest of 1315 was a catastrophe. It started raining in spring and essentially didn't stop. The grain drowned in the fields. What got harvested came in wet, dried badly, and sits in barns now going slowly grey, with mould that you have to pick through by hand before you can grind it. The miller, Walter, of the East Mill, a man built roughly like an ox and with the temperament to match, gets your grain every Thursday and returns it as flour by Saturday, and the arrangement has been in place since before you were born, and you hate it, because Walter charges you too much and you can't prove it, and your father couldn't prove it before you, and Walter knows that you know, and he weighs the bags back with a slight smile that makes you want to throw things. This morning's flour came in on Saturday. You dip your hand in and lift a handful and let it fall between your fingers, watching it in the firelight. The colour isn't quite right. A little too grey, a little too damp. Feel. Not quite the fine dryness of good flour. There's a heaviness to it. Smell. Faintly sour, which might be the rye, which is naturally more sour than wheat, or might be something beginning to go off. You push your fingers deeper into the sack. The flour at the bottom is colder, denser, compressed by its own weight. This will make acceptable bread. Not great bread. Not the bread you could make with good grain in a dry year. The bread that has a tight, even crumb, and a crust that sings when you tap it, that golden brown shell holding something warm and yielding inside. That bread is something you make perhaps 3 times a year now, when everything aligns correctly, and people taste it and their eyes change, and you feel something in your chest that is as close to pride as you allow yourself. This will make acceptable bread. Bread that feeds people. Bread that keeps the town alive. That will have to be enough. You start with the water. The boiled water from the pot, now cooled enough to touch, poured into the wide wooden trough that takes up most of the table. Not too hot. Hot water kills the yeast. Not too cold. Cold water slows it, makes the dough sullen and uncooperative. You test it with your elbow, the way you'd test a baby's bath, and the water is exactly where you want it, just above skin temperature, comfortable. The yeast starter goes in next. You spoon it out carefully, the thick, sour, bubbly mass of it, and stir it into the water, watching it cloud and dissolve and spread. The smell of it blooms up into the cold air, that ancient smell, that alive smell. 40 years of yeast doing what yeast has always done. Now the flour. You add it in stages, stirring first with the wooden paddle, and then, when the mixture thickens beyond what the paddle can handle, with your hands. This is the part you cannot delegate. Not because you're precious about it. You're not precious about anything anymore. Precious is a luxury. But because you cannot trust anything you can't feel. The dough tells you things with your hands that it cannot tell, you with your eyes. The resistance of it, the tackiness, or lack of it, the way it pulls away from your palms when it's properly mixed, or clings to them when it needs more flour. You've been reading dough with your hands since you were 9 years old. You know what it says. This batch is slightly stiff. The flour is drier than you thought. And you add water, a little at a time, tiny additions, waiting to feel the change between each one. Your arms are submerged to the elbow in the stuff, turning, folding, pressing. The cold in the room means the dough is slow to come together. You can feel your biceps burning with the effort of working it by the 4th, 5th, 6th turn. Knead. This is the word, and it sounds gentle, but it isn't. Kneading a full batch of bread dough, enough to make 30-40 loaves at the scale this town requires, is the most physically demanding thing you do in a day that is full of physically demanding things. You push the heel of your hand into the dough, leaning your whole weight behind it, and the dough resists, pushes back, and you fold it over and push again. The table shudders with the force of it. The jars on the shelf rattle. Your back begins to ache. It always begins to ache. But you find the rhythm, the steady rock of it, forward and back, the way you might row a boat, the way your body knows this motion so well it becomes a kind of meditation. Your mind wanders. The fire crackles. The wind outside pushes at the shutter. Outside, the town is still mostly asleep. Not entirely. It never is entirely. A market town is always doing something, always has someone awake somewhere tending to some necessity, but mostly. The carters who will bring goods to the Wednesday market haven't arrived yet. The fishmonger won't set up until it's light. Even the priests at St. Edmund's won't ring the prime bell for another hour. But in here, in this room that is never fully dark and never fully silent, the bread is already becoming itself, and you're already at work. This is how every morning starts. This is how every morning has started since your father died 14 months ago of a fever that lasted 3 days and then took him before the physician from Coventry could be sent for, leaving you his business, his tools, his debt to the miller, his reputation in the town, his seat in the guild of bakers, provisionally, conditionally, as a woman, which means your seat is always provisional and always conditional, and his recipe, written in his careful, laboured hand on a piece of vellum that is now so flour-stained you can barely read it, but you don't need to read it any more. You have it in your hands. You have it in your blood. The town of Arden eats bread. The town has always eaten bread. Someone must bake it. For now, that someone is you. By the time the dough is resting, covered with a cloth, sitting near the fire, beginning its first rise, the oven is approaching ready, you can tell by the colour. The inside of the dome has shifted from that creamy white to something almost translucent, a faint silvery brightness that means the stone is at temperature. You test it the old way, the way your father taught you, the way his mother taught him. You throw a small handful of flour into the dome mouth. If it burns immediately to black, too hot. If it sits there, too cold. If it flares briefly and then disappears in a puff of white, just right. The flour flares and disappears. Just right. You rake out the ash. This is another step that sounds simple and is not. The ash inside a fully heated bread oven is incredibly fine, white as bone, almost weightless, and it goes everywhere. It gets in your eyes, your nose, your lungs. You wear a cloth over your mouth and nose for this part, a habit so old you don't remember learning it, and you use the long-handled iron rake to pull the coals and ash out through the oven mouth in long, careful strokes. The heat coming off the open oven is extraordinary. Even across the length of the rake handle, your face tightens from it. Your eyes go dry. The fine hairs on your arms, the ones not covered by your sleeves, stand up in the heat and then curl. The radiant warmth fills the bakehouse. For approximately 30 seconds, you're completely, deeply, unambiguously warm. And then you go back to work, and the warmth stops being something you notice and becomes just the background of existence again, like the smell of flour, like the sound of the fire, like the ache in your back. The oven is clean, the oven is hot, the dough has risen. You can tell by lifting the cloth, by the changed feel of it, lighter, slightly bubbly at the surface, that intoxicating yeasty smell that rises when you uncover it. Now you shape. This is what it all comes down to. Everything before this, the heating, the mixing, the kneading, the rising, is preparation for this moment when the dough becomes recognizably and finally bread. You tear it into portions by weight. The weights are not approximate. There is a set of iron scales on the corner of the table, and a collection of iron weights ranging from a ½ ounce to a full pound, and you use them for every single loaf. Not most loaves, not most of the time. Every loaf, every time, weighed before it goes into the oven. This is not perfectionism. This is survival. The assize of bread, the royal law that has governed bread in England for nearly 100 years, sets the minimum weight of a loaf based on the current price of grain. As grain prices go up, the minimum weight goes down. You're allowed to make lighter bread when flour costs more, because otherwise no one could afford to bake it. As grain prices go down, the loaf must get heavier. Right now, in October of 1315, the price of grain is catastrophic. A quarter of wheat that would have cost 3 shillings in a normal year now costs 8. The minimum weight for a farthing loaf has dropped accordingly. You can legally bake lighter, but the margin is so thin and the inspectors so unreliable and the consequences of getting it wrong so severe that you weigh everything twice. The guild warden, John Proudfoot, has already inspected 3 bakeries in town this year and found short weight. 2 of them were fined. One of them, Thomas Webber's brother, who baked out of a shed behind the dye works, was sentenced to the hurdle. You were there, in the market square, when they dragged him through. You're not ready to think about that yet. Weigh the portion. Shape it. Both hands pressing down and turning, creating the surface tension that makes the crust, finding the seam and pressing it together, rolling the whole thing into a tight round. You can do this without looking. Your hands know the shape from 10,000 repetitions. The dough feels right under them, supple, alive, slightly warm from its rising. Set it on the peel, the long-handled wooden paddle, and into the oven. The moment the dough hits the oven floor, it begins to change. You can almost see it happen. The surface of the dough stiffens and darkens as the fierce dry heat hits it. The yeast inside, still alive, produces one last burst of gas before the heat kills it. The oven spring, bakers call it, the final rise, and the loaf swells, rounds, becomes something greater than what you put in. The oven takes 12, 15 loaves at once. You load them in rows with the practiced accuracy of someone who has been doing this since childhood, every loaf in the same position, the same spacing, so the heat moves between them evenly. The oven door, a wooden board cut to fit the mouth exactly, charred around the edges from years of service, goes back in place. Now you wait. Not idle. You never wait idle. While the first batch bakes, you're already shaping the second. While the second is proving, rising, resting, becoming ready, you're mixing a third batch of dough. In a busy morning, you can cycle through 3, 4, even 5 batches, the oven mouth opening and closing like a slow, deliberate mouth, taking in raw dough and returning it transformed. Your body finds the rhythm. The cold of the room and the heat of the oven create a constant battle around you, and you move between them, stepping close to load the oven, stepping back into the cooler air to work the dough, stepping close again to check the colour through the gap in the door. Your face alternates between flushed and cold. Your hands are never at one temperature for more than a minute. You've stopped noticing this. Outside, the world begins to wake up. You can hear it through the shutter, the single wooden panel that covers the bakehouse window. as a gradual accumulation of sounds. A rooster somewhere behind the miller's house, cartwheels on cobblestones down toward the market street, the creak and slam of a door, the voice of someone calling something that gets swallowed by distance. The town of Arden is starting its day, and you've been at yours for 3 hours already. The first loaves come out at what you guess is around 5 in the morning, though you don't have a clock and wouldn't trust it if you did. You judge by the church bell. The prime bell from St Edmund's usually rings round 6, and by the light, or the absence of it, through the gap at the shutter's edge, still dark. But the first loaves are done. You pull them on the peel, one by one, and set them on the cooling racks, lengths of wood raised on pegs above the stone shelf, and the sound of them coming out is a kind of music. The hollow knock when you tap the base of a well-baked loaf is one of the most satisfying sounds in the world if you've grown up baking. It means hollow. It means done. It means the structure has set, the crumb has formed, the steam inside has escaped. The smell is almost unbearable. Fresh bread is one of those smells that is somehow both deeply familiar and endlessly astonishing. You've smelled it 10,000 times, and it still hits you in the same place, behind the sternum, warm and sudden every single time. Even when you're exhausted, even when everything hurts, the moment the first loaf comes out of the oven and the steam lifts off it, and the crust crackles as it cools, there is a half-second of pure, uncomplicated pleasure. Then you're already checking the next batch. The morning's work is going well, considering. The second batch is slightly darker than you'd like on one edge. The oven runs hotter on the left side toward the back, always has, you know, to rotate those loaves earlier and sometimes forget. But it's within acceptable range. The third batch, the Maslin loaves made from the rye wheat mix, will be denser and darker by nature, their crumb tighter, their crust more substantial. These are the loaves for ordinary people, the everyday bread. The manchet, the fine white bread made from properly sifted wheat flour, small and round and pale crusted. You only bake on order for the households that can afford it. The Holt family, the merchant Aldred and his wife, Canon Robert at St Edmund's, who receives a weekly allocation and pays promptly, which puts him in a class above most of your customers. For the rest of the town, it's maslin and rye, dark and dense and filling. You eat it yourself. You've been eating it your whole life. By the time the prime bell rings from St Edmund's, the first proper bell of the day, announcing morning prayer, you have 43 loaves cooling on the racks. 43 loaves. And the order you took yesterday from John Fletcher the tanner is for 20 of those, which means you have 23 to sell through the window, and your calculation this morning, done in your head, in the dark, while the dough was proving, tells you that 23 loaves at the prices the assize allows will cover your costs for the flour, the wood, the hearth tax, the guild fee, and leave you roughly 10p toward replacing the broken wheel on the small cart. 10p. Out of a morning's work that started at 2 in the morning. This is not complaint. This is just the number. You've learned not to feel things about numbers. Numbers are what they are. You pull the first tray of cooled loaves to the front of the shop. Your father's term for the bakehouse window, the wide wooden shutter that folds down to create a counter facing the street, and unlatch it. The morning air comes in cold and sharp and smelling of mud and manure and the smoke from a dozen chimneys up and down the street. After hours inside with only your own fire and your own flour, the outside smell is a shock, faintly unpleasant, a reminder that the world is out there and has its own priorities. The street is already moving. Arden is a market town, which means it has one major reason for existing, the Wednesday and Saturday markets, and it organises everything else around those events. On market days, the main street fills with stalls from before dawn until after dark, and the noise and smell and push of it is something you can feel in your chest half a mile away. On other days, the street is quieter, but never empty. Even on a cold Tuesday morning in October, even in a year when half the county is watching what's left of its food supply with the careful anxiety of someone counting coins they can't afford to lose, there are people on the street. A woman with a basket of wet laundry balanced on her head, walking the careful erect walk of someone managing an unstable load. Two men arguing outside the blacksmith's, voices low but gestures emphatic. A child, barefoot, God help the child in October, chasing something that might be a dog or might be some other animal entirely, too fast to identify. The fishmonger's boy setting up the portable table at the corner, arranging last night's catch in careful rows, calling to the woman with the laundry as she passes. And already, before you've been open a full minute, before you've even arranged the loaves properly in the window, a customer. She's an older woman, maybe 50, wrapped in a dark brown cloak that has been repaired so many times in so many different shades of thread that it looks like a map of somewhere. She has the wide hands and slightly bowed posture of someone who has done physical labour her entire life, and she's looking at your loaves with the particular expression you've learned to read as, "I need this, and I'm calculating whether I can afford it at the same time." "Morning, Marjorie." "Morning, Edith." You know Edith Cartwright. She's the wife of the rope maker on the east side of town. She has 4 children, one of whom is currently apprenticed to a fuller in Coventry, which everyone knows was arranged through a favour owed to someone's cousin and cost more than was ever admitted. She buys bread twice a week, always the Maslin loaves, always 2 of them. 2 Maslin, she says, and sets her coins on the counter without being asked. You pick up the nearest 2 loaves and feel them quickly with both hands before you pass them across, not from distrust, but from habit, from the constant unconscious weighing that your hands do automatically now, so that you know the weight of a loaf, the way you know the weight of your own name. These are fine, solid, good. "They're a bit small," Edith says, not accusatory. She says it the way you might observe that the weather has been cold as a fact of the world. "Grain's dear," you say. "I'm at the legal weight." "I know you are." Edith gathers her loaves into her basket. "I know it isn't your fault. I just—" She stops, looks at the bread in her basket with an expression that is, briefly, very tired. "My Tom said last night, he said, 'Edith, if the bread gets any smaller, I'm going to have to eat my own boot.' You don't say anything because there's nothing to say. The grain prices are what they are. The assize is what it is. The harvest failed because the rain fell when the rain wasn't supposed to fall, and no amount of conversation changes any of it. God willing, it'll be better come spring, you say, because you have to say something, and this is the thing people say." Edith nods. God willing. She moves off down the street with her basket, and you watch her go and you think, her husband's business will be slower this year too, because fewer goods are moving on the roads, because everyone is tightening what they spend, because this is what a failed harvest does. It doesn't just make bread smaller, it makes everything smaller. The whole economy of the town contracting around the absence of grain, the way a body contracts around an empty stomach. You're already thinking about the next customer before Edith has turned the corner. The morning passes in transactions. This is what most of a baker's day is. Transactions. The exchange of bread for coin, repeated dozens of times, each one different in its details and identical in its structure. Someone comes, they choose. You weigh. Money changes hands. They leave. Someone new comes. You develop a faculty for reading people quickly, a kind of speed recognition of need and means and mood. The man who stands for a long time looking at the manchet loaves before settling on rye is someone who wants the better thing and can't afford it. The woman who asks the price and then asks it again isn't suspicious of you. She's doing arithmetic in her head, subtracting the bread from something else, seeing what's left. The boy who comes on behalf of his mother and can't remember exactly what she sent him for, that's bread and possibly something else, and you ask him directly your mother's name, and usually you know the household, and you know what they usually buy. Between customers, when the gaps allow, you're moving, checking the oven temperature, loading the next batch, turning the cooling loaves, tapping the base of each one, checking for any that are underdone. They have a slightly muffled sound instead of that clear hollow knock, and they go back in on the cooling rack near the oven mouth to finish. You're also watching the street, not because you're suspicious of people, not exactly, but because a bakery is a kind of centre of gravity in a medieval town and things happen near it. News arrives at a bakery before it arrives anywhere else, because people stop to buy bread every day, and while they're there they talk. This morning the news, moving from person to person, passed across the counter with the bread, is about the flooding at the South Bridge. 3 foot of water over the causeway, says William Dyer, a large man whose hands are permanently stained blue from the vats. Couldn't get a cart through it this morning. The Avon? Been rising since last week. He shakes his head. If it floods the lower mill, old Walter's going to have a time of it. You think about the flour still in your storeroom, about what it would mean if Walter's mill were out of commission for even a week. How bad is the standing water in the fields, you ask? Because this is a related question, because everything is connected, because if the fields are waterlogged, the next planting will fail, and then next year will be worse than this one. Bad, says William. And that's all he says, and the way he says it carries more information than a long speech. You hand him his rye loaf, he pays, he leaves. You think about the fields, you think about next year's grain, you think about the weight of every loaf you'll have to bake next year if next year is worse, and then the next customer comes and you stop thinking and start weighing. Around mid-morning, you judge it by the light, the way the winter sun gets above the buildings on the east side of the street and finally starts hitting the front of your shop, pale and thin but real. You get a visit from John Proudfoot. You know he's coming before you see him, because the woman who buys her bread before him glances back down the street, as she leaves with an expression that you've learned to interpret correctly. A slight tightening around the eyes, a quick look away, the body language of someone who has just noticed something they'd prefer to avoid. John Proudfoot, Guild Warden of the Bakers of Arden, is approximately 55 years old and shaped like a man who was once solidly built and is now softening in all the places where solidity used to be. He wears his guild badge on a chain around his neck, a small enamelled disc that he polishes, you're fairly sure, every morning, and he carries a leather satchel that contains, among other things, his set of official weights. He's not your enemy. You tell yourself this regularly. He's not your enemy. He's doing a job. The assize of bread exists for a reason, to protect ordinary people from being cheated by bakers who would sell short weight if nobody was watching. That's a legitimate thing to protect against. You've known bakers who did it, still do it probably, in the dark corners of their storerooms, The midnight shaving of a quarter-ounce off each loaf that adds up to coin they shouldn't have. You don't do it. But John Proudfoot's assessment of your probity is complicated by factors that have nothing to do with the weight of your bread, like the fact that you're a woman. The Guild of Bakers has had female members before, widows who inherit their husbands' businesses mostly, and it has a procedure for them, a provisional status that requires annual confirmation, a slightly higher fee than male members pay, and a quarterly review rather than the annual review that male bakers receive. This is not law, exactly. It's custom. The kind of custom that has the force of law because nobody with the power to change it has any reason to change it. John Proudfoot reviews your bakery every 3 months. He reviewed it 7 weeks ago. There is no procedural reason for him to be here this morning. Good morning, John, you say, using his first name, because you've known him since you were 12 and because using his title every time would be either obsequious or ironic, and you can't afford to be either. Marjorie. He stops at the counter and looks at the loaves arranged on the shelf behind you with the careful assessment of a man who is always assessing. Quiet morning? Steady enough? Good, good. He reaches into his satchel and produces his weights. The official weights, issued by the town council, guaranteed against the standard kept at the Guildhall. I'll just take a look. You say nothing. He reaches across the counter, not asking permission, this is his right, and picks up a loaf, the Maslin loaf, second from the left, medium-sized, the kind you sell most of. He takes it to his own scale, which he has produced from the satchel with the ease of a long practice. You watch his face. His face gives nothing away. John Proudfoot has a face that is designed, you think, to give nothing away. The flat, weathered face of a man who has sat through 1,000 negotiations and 100 inspections and knows that expression is information, and information is power. He sets the loaf on the scale, adds weights, adjusts, 1 second, 2. The scale balances at the exact legal minimum for a farthing Maslin loaf, given the current grain price is set at the Saturday market. Not heavy, not short, exactly where it needs to be. Of course it is. You weighed every loaf this morning. You weigh every loaf every morning. Your scale is the same scale your father used, checked against the Guildhall standard at the start of every year. You are not short weight. You have never been short weight. You will not be short weight. Fine, John says. I know, you say. He puts the loaf down and picks up another, weighs it too, and another. This is his right, and you stand there and let him do it, because you have no choice, and because he is also doing what he is supposed to do. The watching is the whole point. The watching is what makes the system work. Heard you've been buying from Walter exclusively, he says, while he weighs. That mill still the only one you use? It's the closest. Oldfield's mill does good work, south side of town. Oldfield charges more per bushel. He weighs the third loaf, sets it down. Just might be worth it. Oldfield's flour is consistent. You don't say, Walter's flour is consistent too, when he hasn't been skimming it. You don't say, Walter's cousin is on the council, and has been on the council since before either of us was born. You don't say any of the things that are true but impolitic, and would, if said, be remembered against you. I'll consider Oldfield, you say. John Proudfoot picks up his weights and puts them back in the satchel. He straightens up and looks at you, really looks at you for a moment, in a way that is neither friendly nor unfriendly, just direct. Your father made good bread, he says. I know. You make decent bread. The distinction is not accidental. I'll keep working on it, you say. He nods, settles the satchel on his shoulder, and moves off down the street to inspect the next bakery. Your hands, you notice, have been pressed flat against the counter since the moment he arrived. You lift them now, flex them once, and turn back to the oven. Decent bread. Fine. There are things you notice about yourself that you didn't notice a year ago, before your father died, when you were still learning, and he was still the one who made the decisions and you were the one who followed instructions. Things that have changed in you, grown in you, since you started carrying this alone. You notice what's running low before it runs out. Flour, yes, but also the lard used to grease the pans, the linen cloths used to cover proving dough, the split wood stacked against the outer wall that feeds the oven fire. You have a running inventory in your head that updates constantly, automatically, the way your hands know the weight of a loaf. You notice the mood of the town in ways you didn't before. The way this morning felt heavier than last Tuesday, the conversation shorter, the women's faces tighter around the eyes. The flooding at the South Bridge is part of it. But it's more than that. The season turning toward winter, in a year when everyone already feels short of what they need. The animal calculation running in every household. What do we have? What do we need? How long will it last? And you notice the way certain men, not all men, not even most men, but certain men, adjust their behaviour around you now that there's no Thomas Fletcher here to answer for you. The way John Proudfoot uses decent where he means acceptable for a woman. The way Walter Miller's smile has a different quality now when you go to collect your flour. A quality of assessment that your father never received. These things are not surprising. You weren't naive. You knew, when your father died, that the town would be watching to see if you'd fail. You've chosen not to fail. This requires a kind of permanent alertness that is exhausting in a way that's different from the physical exhaustion of baking, the exhaustion of the body. The body can rest. You can lie down at night and let your back and arms and hands recover, and they do. They're resilient. They've always been resilient. The other exhaustion, the one from watching and calculating and managing impressions and navigating the politics of a small town, that one follows you into sleep. But there's no help for it. So you bake. The walk to the mill is unavoidable. You need to speak to Walter about next week's order. You're down to the last sack of flour in the storeroom, and the calculations don't work unless you have grain in by Saturday. And you can't send a message through a boy because the last time you did that, the price Walter quoted came back higher than the price he later claimed he'd offered. And when you showed up to pay, there was an argument. And the argument was conducted in front of two men who were also waiting to collect flour. And you emerge from it with your original price, but with the distinct sense that you'd been made to look difficult. You go yourself. The East Mill is not far. Nothing in Arden is far. The town is not large. But the walk takes you through the part of the street that goes down toward the river. And this morning, that means mud. Not ordinary mud, the mild sort you're used to navigating on your patterns, hopping between the drier stones, steering clear of the channels that run down the middle of the street. Real mud. The flooding has come up into the lower street, just below the knee on the street surface, brown and thick and smelling of river bottom and things that live at river bottom. You go back for the pattens. The pattens are wooden platforms strapped over your shoes, each one raised about 3 inches on a curved iron hoop, designed to lift you above ordinary street mud. In proper flooding, 3 inches is not enough, but it's what you have. The walk takes 20 minutes. You pass, on the way, the tanner's yard where the smell hits you from half a street away, the particular eye-watering assault of hides soaking in vats of urine and oak bark, a smell so specific and so overwhelming that once you've smelled it you can identify a tanner's yard from 40 paces in any direction, forever. John Fletcher, who ordered 20 of your loaves this morning, is somewhere in that smell. His delivery boy will come round at noon. The blacksmith's, where you can hear the hammer even before you're close enough to hear anything else. The iron on iron clang with its slight ring afterward, rhythmic and predictable, the pulse of the metalwork neighbourhood. The fuller's workshop where 3 men are treading cloth in vats of water and urine. Yes, also urine. Medieval textile processing requires industrial quantities of urine. This is simply a fact about the industry, and nobody is happy about it. But wool does not clean itself. Moving in the careful, balanced way of people doing work that requires both strength and precision with their feet, like a slow, purposeful dance in a vat. The smell of the fullers is distinct from the tanners, and mercifully slightly less aggressive, though you'd struggle to explain the distinction to anyone who wasn't used to both. And then the mill. The East Mill sits at the point where the Arden Brook meets the lane, its water wheel turning in the cold brown water with the steady, heavy sound that you've been hearing your whole life. A deep creak and splash, creak and splash. The wheel's pace determined by the current, which is running faster than usual because of the rain. Walter is in the yard. He's talking to another man you don't recognise, someone in a better cloak than is usual for mill business, with a kind of horse that cost money tied at the post. Walter sees you come in and says something to the man. You catch just a moment and then turns to face you with his characteristic expression. Not quite a smile, not quite an absence of a smile. Something between the two that could be interpreted as welcoming or dismissive depending on which you chose to believe. Mistress Fletcher, he says. You stopped correcting him about the name. You're Marjorie Fisher. You kept your father's name when you took over the business, not your late husband's. About 3 months ago, because the correction never stuck, and the insistence on it gave him something to smile about. Walter, I need to talk about next week's order. Well? He looks past you briefly at the man with the horse, a glance that might be apologetic or might just be territorial. I've got a bit of a situation this week, Marjorie, the flooding. I'm going to have to shut the wheel for 2 days minimum while we shore up the sluice gate. You feel the calculations start in your head before he's finished the sentence. 2 days, you repeat. Could be 3. Depends on the river. I've got enough flour for 4 days of ordinary baking. If I reduce the batch size... Your flour's ready, he says. I ground it yesterday before the water came up. It's in the store. He jerks his head toward the mill building. You can take it today, and next week I'll do my best. He spreads his hands, a gesture that implies limits beyond his control. I'll send word when the wheel's back up. You look at him for a moment. He returns the look, steady, that faint, almost smile in place. Here is the thing about Walter Miller. You don't know for certain whether he skims your flour. You believe he does, the way you believe most things you can't prove. From the accumulation of small inconsistencies, this slight variation in how far your flour goes versus how far it should go mathematically, the way the weights never quite add up to what they should. But belief and proof are different things, and Walter has been milling this town's grain since before your father was your age, and his connections extend to the Guildhall and the church and probably the sheriff's court, and you're a 23-year-old woman running a bakery alone. Right, you say, I'll take the flour now. His boy loads the sacks onto your cart, the small 2-wheeled cart your father built, solid and reliable, with the one wheel that still needs replacing. 3 sacks of flour, heavy enough that the cart rocks on its wheel as they're loaded. You tie them down with the rope and push the cart yourself, back up the street, through the mud, your pattens making the particular sucking sound of wooden shoes in thick mud, your breath coming short with the effort on the uphill portion of the lane. 3 sacks of flour. At the current grain price, that's enough for roughly 5 days baking if you're conservative. You'll make it work. You always make it work. St. Edmund's Church, where it rises above the rooftops of the lower town, is the tallest structure for 7 miles in any direction. You know this because your father told you once in the way he told you things, matter-of-factly passing information along with the same directness he used to tell you the oven was hot, or the dough needed more water. Tallest for 7 miles, he said. The tower, when they finished it in your grandfather's time, could be seen from the top of Edgewood Hill. He seemed to find this satisfying, the way people find large things that are simply large satisfying, without needing to explain why. You don't often look at the church. When you're baking, the church is the source of the bells that mark time. When you're in the market, the church is the thing you navigate around. When you're worried, which is most of the time, the church is the place you go and say the things you need to say and try to feel that they're heard. And you don't always feel that they're heard, but you go anyway. But today, coming back from the mill with the cart, you take the lane that runs along the south side of the churchyard because the flooding is less there, and you come around the corner and for a moment the angle is right and the church is just there. The full height of it, the tower against a sky that is cold and pale and almost luminous with thin cloud, the stone dark with rain, the weather vane on the spire moving slightly in the wind. It was built over a long time, this church, the way all things were built in the medieval period. The nave is the oldest part, the deep, dark nave with its thick, rounded arches and its narrow windows that let in light like a grudging gift. The tower was added later, your grandfather's time, your father said, which would make it 70 or 80 years old. And the new chapel on the north side is barely 20 years old, still pale where the stone hasn't yet greyed to match the rest. The men who built this church are dead. Most of them. The stone is still here. There's something about the church that steadies you on days when you need steadying. Not the religion exactly, not the prescribed comfort of it, but simply the scale of the thing. The fact that it took multiple generations of people to build, that it holds the memory of every service ever held in it, every candle burned, every prayer said, every life begun and ended under its roof. The town has been doing this for a long time. People have been baking bread in this town for longer than the church has been standing. You pull the cart around the corner and back toward the bakehouse. The oven needs loading. Market day, when it comes, is its own species of chaos. Wednesday. You're up at midnight on market mornings. Not 1:30, not 2. Midnight. Because the Wednesday market starts at first light, and the customers who come first, the ones who'll pay full price without haggling, who'll buy the better loaves without requiring the argument, those customers arrive at first light and are gone by the time the sun is an hour up. The stall is set up before dawn. Your stall is a simple trestle table, positioned at the front of the bakehouse. The advantage of baking on the main market street is that you don't have to carry your goods anywhere. With the broad wooden counter that serves as the display surface and the iron hook at the corner where you hang the scale. By the time it's light enough to see, you have 70 loaves laid out. 70 loaves. The smell of them carries down the street in the cold morning air and does the work of any advertisement. People's noses lead them to you before their eyes do. You can see it happen. Someone turns a corner, their head comes up slightly, they orient toward the smell, and then they're walking toward you with that expression, that automatic, slightly urgent expression of someone who is hungry and has located the source of food. 70 loaves at the crack of dawn. You baked from midnight until that moment without stopping. Your back knows it. Your arms know it. Your hands know it most of all. The knuckles are redder than usual, the joints more swollen, and there's a new blister forming at the base of your right thumb from where the peel handle caught a particular angle in the loading process. You haven't had time to notice this until now, and now that you notice it, it burns with steady, insistent attention. You rub it against your apron and ignore it. Market day. The main street of Arden fills up fast. The stall holders come first. They have their allocated places, agreed each season with the market warden, and they've been arriving since before dawn to secure them, laying out their goods in the grey light, calling greetings to neighbours they've been doing this with for years. The cheese seller with her rounds wrapped in cloth. The herb woman who comes down from somewhere up the hill with bundles of dried rosemary and lavender and thyme. The wool merchant who takes up half the street with his bolts of cloth, and his boy who has to move them when a cart comes through. The knife grinder who sets up his wheel at the edge of the market and grinds from before dawn until after dark, and the screeching sound of steel on stone is just part of the market soundscape, background noise like the wind. Then the animals. There are always animals at a medieval market. Cattle, driven down from the farms and penned in the square at the East End, lowing their displeasure at the treatment. Sheep in a temporary fold of hurdles, pressing against each other for warmth. Pigs, and here they are, the pigs, several of them, rooting through the detritus at the edges of the market, because pigs are half pets and half sanitation system in a medieval town, and everyone tolerates them because the alternative is worse. Chickens in cages stacked on a trestle, a goat tied to a post who keeps eating the corner of the cheese seller's cloth and receiving only cursory reproaches, because the cheese seller is too busy to deal properly with the goat. The noise is extraordinary. When I say extraordinary, I need you to understand what that means in a medieval market town. This is not the noise of a modern outdoor event, where there's music from a stage and people talking over their phones. This is layered, insistent, sourceless noise. The noise of a few hundred people all doing different things at close quarters, none of them dampened by anything. No insulation, no walls between you and the next person, just the open air and the buildings that funnel sound rather than absorbing it. Vendors calling their goods, fresh bread from the East End, 3 for 2pence. That last one is not you, but you hear it, and you note the price, and you note that it's slightly below what you're charging, and you note the quality of the stall it comes from. Aldred Baker, who operates out of the inn yard 2 buildings down, and whose bread is adequate but not in your assessment worth any price, and you decide that your price stays where it is. You can tell quality. Your customers can tell quality. Quality is your argument. The cattle lowing, the sheep bleating, each one slightly different in pitch, creating an animal harmony that nobody asked for. The clang of the smith's hammer from his forge at the back of the street, the knife grinder's wheel, the argument happening at the north end of the market between 2 men about a horse, conducted at full volume and without any apparent progress toward resolution. And underneath it all, underneath the noise and the smell of animals and the coal smoke and the mud, the smell of your bread, which is objectively the best smell in the market. You sell 23 loaves in the first hour. Your scale is in constant use. Every sale requires the weight check, the coin count, the brief exchange that might be a single word or might be a negotiation depending on who's buying. You develop a rhythm for it. Pick up, feel, weigh if uncertain, name the price, receive the coin, pass the bread, move to the next. The rhythm keeps the line moving and the customers satisfied, and your mind from catching on any single thing long enough to worry about it. A woman with a baby on her hip buys 2 rye loaves and counts out her coins with one hand, the other occupied with keeping the baby from grabbing the bread display. A man you've never seen before, a travelling merchant by the quality of his clothes and the implication of mud on his boots that speaks of long roads, buys 3 manchet rolls and eats one immediately, standing at the stall with the particular focused appreciation of someone who has been travelling since before dawn and hasn't eaten yet. "Good bread," he says, sounding surprised. "Thank you," you say, and mean it, because good is better than decent. A group of children with a single coin between them who want to know what they can get for a halfpenny, and you give them a portion of bread that is slightly more than a halfpenny's worth because they're children, and it's October, and some of them don't have shoes. You notice the shoelessness, the way you notice everything, not dramatically, just there it is. A fact about this year, about what this harvest failure means to the families at the bottom of the town's economy. Children who should have shoes going without in October in England. The bread goes out into the town and the town feeds itself loaf by loaf. This is what you're for. This is the thing that matters, underneath all the economics and guild politics and miller negotiations and weight calculations. People need bread. You bake bread. The exchange is as old as the town itself. It's simple. It's not simple at all. The crisis, when it begins, starts with smoke. Not the ordinary smoke of the oven. You know that smoke, have been smelling it your whole life, know its colour and its pace and what it means in every variation. The smoke from a well-managed fire, the pale grey stream that rises steady and disperses, the slightly darker smoke when a new log hasn't, caught properly and needs adjusting, the acrid smell when something has accidentally fallen against the oven door. This smoke is different. You're at the stall in the mid-morning rush, the market at its fullest, the street thick with people and animals and carts, when you smell it. Not the oven smoke, something darker, something with a different quality, a thicker, more resinous note that lands at the back of your throat with a warning. You turn. The smoke is coming from the direction of the storeroom, not the bakehouse, the storeroom. The small room at the back, adjacent to the main bakehouse, where you keep the flour sacks, the extra wood, the tools and supplies. The room where, this morning, you stacked 3 new sacks of flour from Walter's mill. Someone needs to cover the stall. There's no one to cover the stall. "Agnes," you call, across to the woman at the stall 2 positions down. Agnes Cooper, who sells cheese and eggs and occasional preserved fruit and who has been your neighbour in the market since before your father died. Agnes looks up, sees your face, sees the direction you're looking. "Go," she says immediately without being asked. You go. The storeroom door is hot. Not burning, the wood isn't burning, but warm in a way that is wrong, a way that communicates heat on the other side. You press your palm against it for a second. Hot, yes, but you can touch it. You open it. Smoke, thick and low, pouring out through the gap the moment the door moves. You drop immediately to a crouch. Your father's first lesson. Years ago, fire makes smoke. Smoke kills first, stay low. And push through into the room. The flour sacks are on the left. The fire is on the right. The stack of split wood against the far wall is burning at the base. A small fire still catchable, but with ambitions. The wood has been smouldering, perhaps for an hour, perhaps longer, started by a coal from the oven that rolled out and wasn't noticed, or a spark that drifted, or something. Less explicable, but equally dangerous. The flour. A bakehouse fire with flour dust in the air can go from manageable to catastrophic in the time it takes to blink. Flour dust suspended is explosive. The right concentration, the right spark, and the whole room goes at once the way a bellows hits a fire. You don't run for water. You grab the shovel from the wall, the broad-bladed iron shovel used for clearing the oven, and scoop. Sand from the bucket near the door, kept there for this reason, for exactly this reason, because your father built safety practices into this room the way he built everything, practically without drama, because a practical man knows the things that will try to kill you. Sand on the fire, once, the base of the wood stack, the flames gutter, twice. More sand thrown in an arc to cover the edges. The flames lower. You can see more clearly now. The smoke is still thick, but you're low and breathing better. The wood stack's base, 3 or 4 logs, is charred through, the fire living in the grain of the wood, and you lever them apart with the shovel blade, separating them, isolating the burning pieces, smothering each one individually with sand until the last one is not flame but just heat, and then just black. The flour is intact. You stand up, slowly, legs shaken from adrenaline and the crouching, and do a full check of the room. Touch the wall timbers, warm in one place, nothing alarming. Check the ceiling, smoke blackened but not igniting. Check the flour sacks, intact. The cloth slightly warm on the surface but not burnt. The fire is out. You lean against the door frame for a moment, feeling the shaking in your hands. This is the thing about a bakehouse fire. It's not a surprise. Every baker knows it can happen. Every baker has protocols for it. Your father drilled them into you until they were instinct, the same way he drilled bread weights into you, until your hands knew them without measurement. Stay low, sand first, cover, the base, isolate the sources. But knowing what to do and doing it while smoke pours down your throat and your eyes stream and your hands shake, those are different things. You did it. The flour is safe. The storeroom is saved. The bakehouse is intact. Outside, the market is still running. Agnes is covering your stall. You can hear her voice, calling the prices. The knife grinder's wheel is still screaming. The cows are still lowing. You wipe your eyes with the back of your hand, which transfers a significant quantity of ash from your hand to your face. You notice this from a great distance, with a mild detachment. Marjorie, you turn. Agnes is at the storeroom door, and behind her are 3 other people, your customers, market day people, drawn by the smoke or by Agnes's call. One of them is a man you recognize, Peter Glover, the leather worker from the South Street, a quiet person of perhaps 45 who fixes things methodically and without fuss. He looks at the blackened wood, in the corner, at the smoke staining the ceiling, at the sand covering everything. He looks at you. You got it, he says. Yes, he nods. Good. He looks around the room again with the professional assessment of someone who has worked with fire his whole life. Leatherworking requires specific fires for specific processes, and a leatherworker knows what a fire tells you about a room. The timber's all right. Left wall could stand some plastering on the inside, but there's no structural damage. You look at the left wall, he's right. The plaster has cracked in the heat, which means the stone behind it heated more than it should have. Not a crisis, not today, but something to address. Thank you, you say, meaning for looking, for knowing, for telling me. He nods again and goes back to the market. Agnes hands you a cup of water from somewhere, you don't know where, and you drink it in one long motion and hand the cup back. Counter's clean, Agnes says. I sold 4 loaves. Here. She puts the coins in your hand. You look at them for a moment. These small iron coins, these pennies and half pennies and farthings, the small denomination weight of a day's work. Thank you, you say again. Agnes's expression does something brief and complicated. Your father would have had that fire out in half the time. My father taught me how to put it out, you say. Agnes looks at you. He did, didn't he? It's not quite a question. Right. Your bread's getting cold. I've got my own stall to run. She goes back to her cheese. You go back to your bread. The market continues. The afternoon is always slower. The main business of the market happens in the morning hours, when the freshest goods are available and the buying households, the ones planning their meals for the week, come out to select and bargain and carry home. By early afternoon, the market thins, the better stalls beginning to pack up, the vendors whose goods have to travel home again securing their remaining stock on carts. You sell your last loaf at the 3rd hour of the afternoon, 70 loaves gone. The last one goes to a boy of about 12 who counts out his coins very carefully with the focus of a person making a significant financial decision, and receives in return a muslin loaf that is the second to last one, the last being a slightly over-baked end-of-run piece that you'll eat yourself tonight. You sit on the stool behind the counter and feel the particular emptiness of having nothing left to sell. Your feet ache, your hands ache, your back aches in the specific located way it always aches after a heavy baking day, a tight knot of pain just above the left hip that you've been carrying for years. The blister on your thumb has burst at some point during the afternoon and is now raw and angry. You've breathed enough flour dust today that your chest feels tight, the way it always does on heavy baking days, the way your father's used to by the time he was 40. The fire in the storeroom is already becoming a story you'll tell eventually, cleaned up into something brisk and competent. There was a fire, I put it out. The shaking hands will be edited out. The moment of leaning against the doorframe will be removed. You'll keep the practical details, the sand, the shovel, the isolation of burning wood, because those are useful, because someone hearing the story might need to know those things. Your father told you stories about fires the same way. Now you understand why. The sun sets early in October. By the time you've cleaned the stall, swept the bakehouse, checked the oven, made sure the stored flour is properly sealed, and the sand buckets by the storeroom are refilled, done a preliminary inspection of the crack in the storeroom plaster. Peter Glover's assessment was right. It needs attention but not urgency. By the time all that is done, it's dark. Not late dark, early dark, the premature dark of a northern October, the kind that arrives while you're still in the middle of your work and makes you feel behind even when you're not. You light the candle. One candle, tallow. The kind you make yourself every autumn from the fat collected through the year in the iron pot on the shelf. It smells when it burns. A faint meaty smell. Nothing like the beeswax candles at St. Edmund's. But it gives light, and it's yours, and you have 100 of them laid by against the winter. You eat the overbaked loaf sitting on the stool, tearing it into pieces. The crust is too hard. This is what happens to the end-of-day bread, the last batch to come out when the oven is losing heat, and the bake-in time extends beyond what the recipe assumes. But the crumb inside is fine, if dense, and you chew it steadily and without thought. Outside, the market street is almost quiet. The stalls are gone. The animals have been moved. The cattle back to whatever field they came from. The pigs absorbed back into the general population of the town streets. The chickens carried off by whoever bought them. The knife grinder is gone. The cheese seller is gone. Even Agnes is gone, vanished home with her unsold stock and her coins and her quiet competence. The street belongs to the dark now, to the people who have legitimate business in the dark and the people who don't, and the watchman who makes his rounds every hour with his lantern and his staff and his practised air of mild vigilance. You hear him pass while you're eating. His staff knocks on the cobblestones with a regular rhythm. His lantern throws a moving pool of yellow light that crosses the front of your shop briefly, and you see it come and go through the gap in the shutter. Another night in Arden. The weeks have a rhythm, and the rhythm makes them pass. Monday and Friday you bake for the regular orders. The tanner, the canon at St. Edmund's, the Holt household, 3 other established accounts. Tuesday and Thursday you bake for the walk-in trade. Wednesday is the Wednesday market. Saturday is the Saturday market. Sunday is the day the law requires the shop to be closed, the day you go to St. Edmund's for the morning service, and then come home and spend the afternoon doing the things that can't be done during the week. Repairing equipment, checking inventories, tending to the starter yeast, writing numbers in the ledger your father kept and that you now keep, in your own hand that is less practiced than his, but more consistent than it was a year ago. The weeks have a rhythm, the months have a rhythm, the year has a rhythm. Autumn deepens, the cold increases, the daylight shrinks by minutes every day, morning and evening, the darkness claiming more of the hours you need to work in. In November, you start finding frost on the inside of the windows. Not unusual for November in the Midlands, but this year it's earlier and heavier, the overnight cold dropping quickly to the kind of temperature that freezes the water in the well pump and means an extra half hour in the morning thawing, waiting, and a kind of helpless impatience that the cold does not respond to. The bread changes with the temperature. Dough that proves slowly in summer proves even more slowly in November. You have to adjust, more starter, slightly warmer water, longer proving times, which means you're getting up even earlier, though it's hard to imagine where the extra time comes from, to allow the overnight prove that produces the most consistent results. Your internal schedule shifts earlier and earlier until you're going to sleep before the watchman's second round and waking before the first. Your hands don't work the same in the cold. The cracks in your knuckles, which heal over summer, are open again by late October. You work with them bleeding, sometimes small cuts that sting in the flour and heal badly and reopen. There's a remedy your mother used, a paste of lard and dried comfrey root, that helps, and you make it and apply it at night, wrapping your hands in old linen to hold it against the skin while you sleep, and it helps a little. You adapt. You've been adapting your whole life. The flood, when it comes, is in December. You've been watching the river all autumn, the way everyone in Arden watches the river in flood season, with the steady background anxiety of people who have built their lives next to something they can't control. The Arden Brook has flooded before. Your father's tales covered 2 major floods in his lifetime and several minor ones. and the pattern of flooding is known, mapped in the town's collective memory like a kind of oral geography. If the water comes up to the base of the old mill's wheel, the lower street will flood within 2 days. If the Holt field is under water, the market square has another week. If the South Bridge culvert blocks, all bets are off. The water comes up to the base of the old mill's wheel on a Monday. By Wednesday, it's in the lower street. By the following Monday, it's touching the edge of your floor. Not inside. The bakehouse floor is raised slightly above street level, a decision your grandfather made when he built the place, either by deliberate planning or by luck. But the street in front of the shop is 3 inches under water. The market can't happen. The carts can't get through the lower road. Walter's mill is silent, its wheel pulled up, its operations suspended indefinitely. You have 11 days of flour left. You bake through the flood. Your customers come to you by an improvised route through the back lanes, which are higher ground, navigable in patterns. They come through mud and cold and rising damp, and they come anyway, because bread is not a luxury, and the flood doesn't make people less hungry. You bake smaller batches, you have to conserve flour, and you charge the assize price, not a farthing more, even though you're aware that right now, right in this week, you could probably charge double and people would still come because there is nowhere else. You don't. This is not because you're saintly. It's because you know the town has a memory. The town will remember what you charged during the flood of 1315. That memory will outlast the flood. So you charge the same price, and you bake smaller batches, and you manage the flour carefully. And on the 9th day of the flood, when you have 2 days' supply left and the water shows no sign of receding, you go to see Agnes Cooper. Agnes, it turns out, has a brother-in-law in a village 8 miles north who has dry grain stored and a means of transport that can navigate the back roads. Agnes's networks extend into corners of the county that you haven't been paying attention to. Agnes has been thinking about this for a week. The grain arrives on the 10th day. It costs more than it should. Everything costs more than it should this year. But it arrives, and it's dry, and it's sound. You bake. On the 12th day of the flood, you open the window as usual, and the first customer is the tanner's wife, who comes via the back lane in boots that are soaked through, and she looks at the bread on the counter and she does something unexpected. She just stands there for a moment looking at it. This woman, who is tough and practical and never sentimental about anything, who runs a household with the efficiency of a small business and the warmth of someone who simply doesn't show warmth in the usual ways. She's standing there looking at the bread. "It's good to see it," she says finally. "It's good to bake it," you say, and mean it more than you expected. She buys 4 loaves, more than she usually takes, and leaves, and you watch her pick her way back through the flood lane with the careful, deliberate steps of someone carrying something they don't want to drop. And you notice that your chest is doing the thing it sometimes does, the thing you don't have a name for, some combination of satisfaction and grief and simple tiredness that sits behind your sternum and doesn't go anywhere, and you stand there for a moment, flour on your hands, the oven behind you pulling the cold from the room, and you let it be there, just for a moment. Then the next customer comes. There's a place you go when you need to breathe. Not often, there isn't often time. But when there's a Sunday afternoon with the week's baking done, and the storeroom checked and the ledger written up, and the hour between completing all that, and the start of next week's preparation, stretching out in a way that feels almost like permission, you go there. The North Tower of St. Edmund's has an interior stair, narrow stone steps, worn smooth in the centre from centuries of feet, with a rope along the wall that serves as a railing and has itself been worn smooth by generations of hands. The priest lets you use it. Canon Robert, who receives his weekly loaves on Thursday and pays promptly, and has a way of asking after your health that is brief but sincere, says, "The tower is God's house, and the stair is open to those who need the height." You aren't sure exactly what he means by this, but you use it, and he's never said otherwise. It's perhaps 50 steps to the top. The first 30 are inside the wall, close and dark, the stone cold through your palm where you touch it. The sound of the stair closed around you, your own breathing loud in the narrow space. Then the stair opens into the bell loft, where the 4 bells of St. Edmund's hang in their wooden frame, massive iron things, the biggest one the size of a small cart, and the ropes hang through the holes in the floor below, and the air smells of old rope and cold stone, and faintly of the pigeons who make their homes in the gaps of the masonry. The bells have names. The warden's bell, the largest, cast in 1248 and still perfectly true. They say you can hear it 8 miles on a clear day. 3 smaller bells whose names you've forgotten but your father knew. The ringing is different from inside the tower than from outside, different than you've heard your whole life. Inside the tower the bells don't ring so much as happen, a physical impact of sound that you feel in your sternum and your molars and the small bones of your hands. You pass through the bell loft quickly and take the final stairs to the roof. The door at the top is iron reinforced, heavy, on a hinge that protests every time you move it. Then cold air, sudden and complete. The sky very close, the wind stronger than you expected. The view. And here is the thing about height in a flat landscape. Everything is visible. The Midlands of England in the medieval period is not dramatically elevated ground. There are hills, but not mountains, modest rises and falls that in another country would not merit the name. The church tower is 60 feet high, perhaps a little more, and 60 feet in this landscape is enough to see far. You can see the river from here. The Arden Brook, swollen from the recent flooding, running brown and full through the gap between the mills and the bridge. The flood marks are still visible along the lower street, a dark line on the stone buildings where the water reached and then receded. You can see the fields. The fields lie around the town in their open strips, the medieval field system, each family working long thin strips arranged in the 3 great open fields that surround Arden on north, east and south. Right now they're ploughed and bare for winter, the dark earth turned up in its furrows, waiting for the spring planting that will determine whether next year is better or worse than this one. The grain failure that started this terrible year, the harvest of 1315, happened in those fields. You can see them from here, still, quiet, patient. The same fields that drowned last summer, that are now waiting in the cold for whatever the spring will bring. You can see the market square, empty on a Sunday, the cobbles bare, the space that 2 days a week holds the whole business of the town reduced to its geometry, a rectangle of stone, a cross in the middle, a well at one corner. You can see the roof of the tanner's yard, identifiable by the line of hides drying even in this weather, stiff and pale. The fuller's workshop, the blacksmith's forge, a faint thread of smoke even on a Sunday because iron doesn't stop needing working, and you can see the mill, Walter's mill, its wheel still turning, everything visible. The whole small world of the town laid out below you like the page of a book. You've been part of this town since before you were born. Your family has been baking here for 60 years, 2 generations, and when you have children, when that becomes something you think about, which it hasn't been, not really, not yet, they'll be the third generation, and the town will carry them the way it carries you, in the way that small towns carry the people whose families have been part of them long enough to become part of the place. The river is where it should be. The fields are waiting. The tower bells are quiet, resting between services. The cold wind comes from the north and makes your eyes water, and smells of ice and distance, and the beginnings of a winter that will be hard but not impossible. A winter you'll get through the way you've gotten through everything, by working, by not stopping, by doing the thing your hands know how to do. You could get through it because the town needs you to. Because bread is the thing that holds the rest together, the daily fact of it, the simple necessity that underlies everything else. The merchants and the guild and the priest and the tanner and the fuller and the farmers in their cold fields, all of them rely at the most fundamental level on the fact that someone is awake before dawn, weighing flour, building heat, turning dough into bread. That someone is you. You stand on the tower until the cold gets too much to ignore, which takes longer than you expect, because the view is what the view is and the cold is just the cold. Then you go back down the worn stone stairs, through the bell loft where the great bells hang silent, down through the dark, narrow passage, out into the churchyard where the graves are half frozen and the path between them is hard underfoot, back through the town, back to the bakehouse, back to the starter yeast which needs feeding before evening. Spring comes gradually. You notice it first in the quality of the light, not its warmth, that comes later, but the quality, the angle changing so that for the first time in months the morning light comes through the bakehouse window at a different height, hitting the back wall instead of the floor. A small thing, a precise thing, the kind of thing you notice when you spend your entire life in the same room at the same hours. Then the mud on the street begins to dry at the edges rather than just consolidating. A difference in texture underfoot, the surface hardening slightly even when the centre of the lane is still mired. The birds return. First the rooks, which have never fully gone but which become louder, more insistent, beginning their nesting arguments in the trees behind the churchyard. Then the other birds, smaller and faster, whose names you've never learned but whose song is the sound of mornings getting lighter. And then, crucially, decisively, the grain prices come down. Not dramatically, not enough to make last year's losses disappear, but grain that cost 8 shillings a quarter in October is 6 shillings by March, and 4 shillings and 9 pence by May, and the direction of travel is unmistakably towards something better than where you've been. The weight of the assize bread goes up accordingly. Your loaves get heavier. Your customers notice. Not dramatically, not with any display of gratitude, because gratitude for adequately weighted bread is not something that typically gets expressed. But there's something in the transactions of spring that is different from the transactions of the previous autumn. A slight release of tension, barely perceptible, the way the air changes before rain but in reverse. Things are getting better, not perfect. Not the world before 1315, the world of normal grain prices and adequate harvests, but better. You bake through it. You bake through the thaw and the spring planting and the first weeks of summer when the warmth actually arrives and stays. You bake with windows open for the first time in months, the bakehouse full of morning air that smells of grass and distant rain and the dung from the farm carts going to the fields, which is still a complicated smell, but a living smell, A growing smell, not the dead smell of frozen mud. You hire a girl, 12 years old, daughter of the Dyer's family 3 streets over, sent to you initially for 3 weeks to see how it went. Her name is Alice. She has small, quick hands and a talent for the shaping of dough that you recognize because you had it at her age, an instinctive feel for the tension in the surface for when it's ready and when it needs more working. You show her the starter. Explain that it must never be allowed to get cold, never be left without feeding, that it is, in its way, a living thing that requires tending. She looks at the clay pot with an expression that is half respectful and half slightly alarmed. It's older than me, she says. It's older than me, you say. It's older than my mother was. If you're going to work here, you need to know how to keep it alive. She nods with the seriousness of a child accepting a responsibility she understands is real. You teach her. That summer, the summer of 1316, the second year of the Great Famine, though you don't know it yet as a historical event, you know it only as the year the rain came again. You have a different crisis than fire or flood. It's a person. Specifically, it's John Proudfoot, the guild warden, arriving on a morning in July with his official weights and an expression that is new to you. Not the usual flat assessment, but something with an edge to it. Something that has been sharpened somewhere outside your knowledge. He inspects as usual. He weighs 8 loaves this time, not 3. The weights are all correct. He knows they're correct. He puts them back in his satchel and stands at your counter and says, without looking at you directly, "There's been a complaint." You wait. Anonymous, filed with the Guild Council last week. He does look at you now. A customer who claims you've been supplying underweight bread for the past 6 months. The silence in the bakehouse is very complete. Outside, Alice is at the oven, loading the second batch. You can hear the scrape of the peel on the stone floor. "You've just weighed 8 loaves, you say." "I have." "All at legal weight?" "They are." "I've been at legal weight every inspection this year, every inspection for 2 years. That is the record." He adjusts the satchel on his shoulder. "The council will want to hear your account at the next guild meeting, 2 weeks' time." You consider this for a moment. "Who filed the complaint?" "Anonymous," he says again, and in the way he says it, you understand that he is not necessarily the origin of this, that someone else initiated this, someone with access to the guild complaint process, and that he may or may not know who, but that you're not going to learn it from him. 2 weeks, you say. 2 weeks. He goes. You stand at the counter for a moment longer. Then you turn and go back to the bakehouse. Alice looks up from the oven. "Everything all right?" "I need the ledger," you say. The ledger is your father's original book, continued in your hand, with every order recorded. Date, customer, number of loaves, weight recorded at the time of baking, price charged. You've kept it scrupulously for 2 years. Your father kept it for 20 years before that. You sit down at the table and you open it and you read back through it. 2 years of small, neat columns of numbers, and the numbers say what you know they say. You have never baked short weight. You have the weights recorded batch by batch, date by date. You have the guild inspection records, every one with John Proudfoot's signature. 2 weeks. Fine. You'll bring the ledger. You'll bring 2 years of John Proudfoot's own signatures, confirming legal weight. You'll bring, if necessary, a dozen customers who buy from you every week. And if the Guild Council wants to decide against you anyway, if the complaint, anonymous or not, has an origin powerful enough to move a council vote against your documented record, then you'll find out something important about whether this town has a place for you. But you'll fight it first. You'll fight it with numbers and records and the careful documentation of a person who knew that someday she'd need exactly this evidence. Your father taught you that too. Keep the ledger, he said. Keep it as if someone will read every line of it someday, because they might. Someone has read it. You're ready. The guild meeting is held in the upper room of the guild hall, a building that occupies a commanding position near the market square, and smells, with absolute consistency, of old wood and tallow candles and the particular combination of old money and small-town authority. There are 12 men on the guild council. You are the only woman. There has been in the past one other female guild member in Arden, the widow of a spice merchant who held his seat for 4 years before her son came of age to take it. This is known. This is the precedent. You sat in this room last year and presented your father's death record and his will, and the guild registration transfer, and the council reviewed it and confirmed your provisional membership with a vote of 7-5. And you noted the 5 and added them to the list of people in this town who would prefer you to fail. John Proudfoot reads the complaint aloud, anonymous, alleging short wheat bread supplied to multiple customers over a period of 6 months, alleging specifically the tanner's account, the fuller's weekly order, and 3 other customers named by their street address. You wait for him to finish. Then you open the ledger. I have the weight records for every loaf baked in those months, you say. Every batch recorded at the time of baking, every weight confirmed by the scale. The dates covered by the complaint are here, here, and here. You turn the pages slowly so the council can see the records rather than just hear them described. John Proudfoot's inspection signatures cover 3 of those dates. The inspection records will confirm his findings. Proudfoot looks at the open ledger. His expression is difficult to read. Furthermore, you say, and you're aware of your own voice being very steady, a steadiness that comes from preparation, from having decided exactly what you're going to say, and in exactly what order. I'd like to address the specific accounts named. The tanner John Fletcher has purchased from me for 20 years, first through my father and now through me. I have his account from the beginning. The weights are all here. You turn to the tanner's page. The tanner himself is in the room. You asked him to come, and he came without hesitation. He is a practical man who knows when a debt of loyalty is owed and when it should be paid. The bread was full weight, he says, when the council looks at him. I weigh it myself when I take delivery. Habit. I'm not saying anything against Marjorie Fisher's honesty. I'm saying I check. It's full weight. The fuller's man, the fuller himself, didn't come but sent his journeyman, nods agreement. The council confers. 7-4. The complaint is rejected. No fraudulent practice found. The anonymous complaint is recorded as unsubstantiated. Your membership is confirmed. Provisional still conditional, still requiring the quarterly reviews. 7-4. You. Close the ledger and put it back in your bag and leave the guild hall and walk the 3 streets back to the bakehouse. And you're thinking, 7-4. 4 men on that council who voted against you. 4 men who, given sufficient weight to a sufficient complaint, would find against you. You note this. You keep baking. Alice stays for a year, then 2 years. Then it becomes clear that she's simply here, that her parents have quietly accepted this as her placement, and your household has absorbed her the way households absorb useful people. Gradually, unremarkably, until one day you realize you haven't thought of her as temporary in months. She learns the weights instinctively, the way you did. She learns the starter management with the seriousness of someone who understands that this particular living thing is their responsibility. She learns which customers you never argue with, not because they're always right, but because the argument costs more than conceding, and which suppliers you hold firm with, because firmness is the only language they respond to. She learns to read the oven the way your father taught you, by the colour of the dome, the smell of the flour thrown in to test, the sound of the fire in the wood. One morning in her second autumn you walk into the bakehouse and she's already there, up before you, which almost never happens, loading the oven with the careful, practiced efficiency of someone who knows exactly what she's doing. She doesn't look up. "Flour was damp," she says. "I just did the water down and added more starter. The dough's proving slower, but it'll be fine." You stand in the doorway for a moment, looking at her. You say nothing. She's 17, and she knows the bread. The thought of this, the continuity of it, this knowledge passing forward the way it was passed to you, sits in your chest with the same quality as the pride you feel about a good loaf. The thing you don't have a name for, that warm and slightly painful presence behind the sternum. "Good," you say finally. She nods and goes back to loading the oven. The years find a rhythm, not an easy rhythm, not a rhythm without difficulty or crisis, or days when everything goes wrong, and you lie awake in the dark calculating how much it will cost and whether you can afford it, and what has to change. But a rhythm. The great famine eases gradually, not dramatically, grain prices coming down by slow degrees, through 1316 and 1317, until by 1318 they're back to something close to normal, and the town exhales in a way that's almost audible, the collective unclenching of 3 years of scarcity. Walter Miller retires. His mill passes to his son, who is younger and less seasoned in the art of the long-standing arrangement, and who charges you the same price as everyone else, which is lower than what you've been paying. This is a small victory that you mark in the ledger with a single line. New rate with E. Miller, lower by 6 pence per bushel. 6 pence per bushel is not a fortune. Multiply by every bushel you'll buy for the next 10 years, it's a fortune. John Proudfoot retires from the guild wardenship when you've been a member for 5 years, replaced by a younger man named Thomas Aldford, who has never seemed particularly threatened by you, and who reviews your bakery annually, as is standard, with the same mild efficiency he applies to everyone else. The provisional status is quietly dropped in your 7th year. Nobody makes an announcement. Nobody acknowledges it. The quarterly reviews simply stop happening. Your membership renews like everyone else's, annually, with no additional conditions. You note this. You say nothing. You keep baking. The new bakehouse. In your 8th year, you expand. The storeroom that almost burned in 1315 has always been inadequate. Too small, too damp in winter, the cracked plaster never fully properly repaired, because you never had the money and the time simultaneously until now. You have both now. Peter, Glover, who stood in your doorway in the smoke on market day and told you about the left wall, builds you a new storeroom. He's a leather worker by trade, but a practical builder by necessity, as most skilled craftsmen are in a medieval town where the only things built for you are built by whoever you know who can build things. He knocks through the outer wall and doubles the storeroom's footprint. New plaster, a properly fitted door with iron hardware, a second sand bucket larger than the first. "You should have done this years ago," he says when it's finished. "I should have done a lot of things years ago," you say. He looks at the new space, the clean walls, the proper floor, the good proportions of a room that is actually the right size for its purpose, and something in his face does the thing that faces do when they're looking at something they built and they know it's well built. "It'll stand," he says. "It'll stand," you agree. He names a fair price and you pay it, and he leaves, and you stand in your new storeroom alone for a moment, your hands on the new plastered walls, feeling the slight coolness of it, the solidity. Your grandfather built the original. Your father maintained it. You expanded it. 3 generations of hands on this building. The evenings when you let yourself have them. Not every evening. Many evenings there are still things to be done. The ledger, the planning, the maintenance of the equipment that is always requiring some small attention. But sometimes, on a winter evening when the work is genuinely finished, and Alice is upstairs doing whatever Alice does in her off hours, you've stopped asking, because she's an adult now and entitled to privacy. Sometimes you sit in the chair by the fire, the good chair that was your father's, with a cup of weak ale and the candle burning on the table beside it, and you let yourself be still. The fire talks to itself. A pop, a settle, the soft collapse of a burned log finding its new shape. Outside, Arden does its evening things, the watchman's rounds, the tavern at the far end of the street, its noise rising and falling with the movement of its customers, the sound of someone's cart on the cobbles at irregular intervals. You think about things on these evenings in a different way than you think about them during the day. During the day, thinking is practical, problem identification, and solution generation, the working mind. In the evenings, it's more like watching, like looking at a landscape from a distance and noticing its shape, rather than calculating the fastest route across it. You think about the woman you were in 13, 15, 23 years old and alone, terrified in a way you didn't call terror because you couldn't afford to name it. The weight calculations done at midnight in a dark room with a single candle and hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. You think about that winter, the flood, the fire in the storeroom. You think about the guild meeting, the ledger, open in your hands, 7 to 4. You think about Alice's hands adjusting the dough for the damp flour without being asked. You've made something here. Not just bread, though bread actually, bread especially. 70 loaves a market day, week after week, year after year. The tanner's family and the fuller's household and the priest at St. Edmund's and the couple at the Holt farm and the children who come with a halfpenny and leave with something warm in their hands. All of them fed continuously for years. You've done that. Your hands have done that. The cracked, flour-scarred, slightly too strong hands that your mother despaired of, that will never be the hands of a gentle-born woman, that know the weight of a loaf the way they know their own fingers. Those hands. The fire settles again. You finish your ale. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. Tomorrow there'll be bread to bake. Good night, perhaps. Winter nights like this. The town very quiet. Alice asleep upstairs, her breathing regular through the thin ceiling. The fire very low now, holding its heat without display. Your hands resting in your lap still. The bread you baked today is in homes across the town right now, cooling on shelves, already eaten in some households, waiting for tomorrow's breakfast in others. In 30 homes, 40 homes, part of 30 different evenings. part of the ordinary, private, unremarkable life of a town that doesn't know or need to know who baked it. That's fine. That's how it should be. Bread is not supposed to be dramatic. It's supposed to be there. It's supposed to be the thing you don't notice until it isn't. The foundation's so basic you don't call it foundation. You just call it the way things are, the way the day goes, the way morning becomes afternoon and work becomes rest. You close your eyes. The sounds of the town, muffled and distant. The faint smell of the bakehouse. Always, everywhere in this building. Yeast and flour and wood ash, the signature of your life. The smell you've been breathing since before you could name it. Your father built this oven. His mother tended the starter yeast before him. Your hands know the dough. Alice's hands are learning it. Tomorrow the oven will heat at 2 a.m. The dough will rise. The loaves will come out hollow and good, and the town will queue at the window in the cold air, and they'll take the bread home, and the town will eat. That's enough. That's more than enough. Let sleep come the way it always comes at the end of a day that asked everything and got it. Let the fire sink to coals. Let the sounds outside thin to occasional, then to almost nothing. You've weighed the dough against the law and found it true. You've held the fire against the walls and kept them standing. You've kept the starter alive 40 years of years, your grandmother's yeast still rising in your kitchen, still doing its patient invisible work. What is there to worry about tonight, in the dark, with the town asleep around you and the bread already made? Nothing you haven't handled, nothing you won't handle again. Let your hands rest, they've earned it. Let the thoughts slow and soften. Let the weight of the day settle into the chair, into the floor, into the stone of this building your grandfather built. You're warm, you're here, the town is fed. Good night. Centuries will pass. The town of Arden will change beyond recognition. The open fields will be enclosed. The guild of bakers will dissolve into history. The water wheels will rust and fall. The old tanner's yard will become a parking lot or a housing development, or something else entirely that you cannot imagine. The church tower will still be standing. People will walk past it every day, the way you walked past it, not looking, because familiarity makes things invisible. But someone, somewhere, before dawn on a cold morning, will be putting their hands in dough, will be checking the feel of it, the weight and resistance of it, the living push of yeast doing its work in the dark. Some things don't change. The need for bread doesn't change. The deep satisfaction of making something that feeds people, that ancient wordless satisfaction, older than any guild or law or market, that doesn't change. Hands that know dough, ovens that hold heat, the smell of a loaf pulled from the fire, that impossible smell that goes straight to the part of you that needs feeding and says, here, this is what you were waiting for. Some things don't change, so let sleep come. Let the oven cool. Let the starter rest until morning. You've done your work. The bread is made. The town is fed. Sleep now, and dream of whatever comes after all this work is done. Good night.